Hello once again, and welcome to the class of MA Final. And we finish up the question of authorship today, prescribed in our syllabus as a part of the biography series published by Sahitya Academy, and the first chapter by Kapila Vatsyayan on the question of authorship. Before we proceed further, let's again have a look at what Kapila Vatsyayan, or the introductory part of the book, says about the Indian classical drama, because it has been referred to as a tradition which is very important, tradition of performance in ancient India. And the date of the dramatic performance, or the origin of dramatic performance in the Indian subcontinent, is traced back to as early as 200 BC. And it is also said that Buddhist philosopher Ashwaghosha, when he composed the book Buddha Charita, it is considered to be the first Indian Sanskrit dramatist or the playwright who composed a drama called Buddha Charita. Now, the major source of evidences for the Sanskrit theatre obviously is, we Indians, is the Natya Shastra, but the date of composition of Natya Shastra is uncertain, and the authorship also has been attributed to Bharat Muni, but there are certain questions and objections which have been answered by Kapila Vatsyayan in her chapter on the question of authorship regarding who was the real author of Natya Shastra and when was it composed. We know that the title of the text, Natya Shastra, is composed of two words. One is Natya and other is Shastra. We also know that the Sanskrit word Nat, the Natya has been borrowed from that, which actually means to act and to represent. And Shastra means some rules, manual, or compendium and treatise. So it is usually used as a suffix in Indian literature. We have many books which have Shastra as the suffix to them. Coming to the composition of Natya Shastra, there are two views. One is the religious belief, and one is the linguistic view, based on the linguistic analysis to decide the date of the composition of Natya Shastra. According to the religious view, it is believed that it was created by Brahma in compliance with the request of gods, headed by Indra, to produce something that would give delight to the eyes and please the ears. However, according to linguistic analysis, there is no unanimity about the specific date, but the scholarly opinion places the composition of Natya Shastra somewhere between 2nd century BC to 3rd century BC. Now we have references and quotation in some of the important works of Kalidasa, Anandvardhana, Bana, Damodar Das Gupta, about from the Natya Shastra. So it is obviously deduced that Natya Shastra is a work of anterior to the 5th century BC, because all these works by Kalidasa, Anandvardhan, Bana, they were composed earlier to that. Now, we know that Natya Shastra is a book which has been noted for the aesthetic theory, and it asserts that entertainment is a desired effect of performance. And again, it says that the primary goal of the Natya Shastra is to transport, or rather, the primary goal of drama is to transport the individual and the audience into some parallel reality which is full of wonder. And it is very important to note that we experience the experiences or the essence of the consciousness of the writer himself. And that is why we can say that when Bharat Muni has been acknowledged as the author of Natya Shastra, although very little is known about him as well as the date and period of composition, there are many assumptions. One Some people say that Bharat is not a single person, but he is actually representing a school of thought or a group of scholars because the ancient name of the country, India, that is Bharat, he represents a collective group of people or scholars who are cumulatively or collectively called Bharat. Now, all these assumptions are answered by Kapila Vatsyayan because we see that the chapter deals with the question of authorship. And in the beginning, she says that before we proceed to investigate who actually the author of Natya Shastra was, or what was the historical or mythical figure that created Natya Shastra, it is very important to address a general question, that is, why nothing or little is known of many Indian authors, writers, theoreticians, and artists. Now, because we belong to a culture which developed a very massive micro and macro classifactory system, and we have a very well laid a scheme of lineages, genealogy, schools of teaching, social caste, etc. She writes this because we are categorized as a pan Indian tradition. Now, if we talk about this, there is a special approach to the works of art and the creators because all the theoreticians, um, for us, the notion of self identity is primary and it stands before we take up any such discussion about authorship. And she further says that this question is answered in two ways because one is the nature or characteristic of Indian art and history. Now, the former one describes that in the Indian context, identity of the self has never been important for an author or creator. Because the whole purpose, when we look back at the Indian tradition, has been for the creator, it has been to merge the I-ness. That is, he doesn't stand anywhere. He has to merge his identity, his I-ness, with some higher self. And this is why it is said that the author liberates himself from certain self identity. And it is only then and then he will be able to join himself with some trans individual identity. So again, Kapila Vatsyayan says, this line is from the text, author searches not for the new unique self. Instead, it is submerging himself in a perennial flow. So the author actually becomes part of the perennial flow where the readers, the spectators, the audience, and the author become one, and no one can be identified or distinguished from the other. And that is why it is said that in the Indian context, the whole purpose of authorship is depersonalization. When we will read T.S. Eliot later on an objective, correlative, and impersonality theory, we know that we have been talking about losing the identity and subjectivity is the greatest success of a great writer. But we know that in the Indian context, we have primarily been focusing on the identity, merging of the identity or individuality, because the moment of creation, when the author creates something or reflection, is like deducing a certain theory or evolving a certain set of principles, which is possible only after the subjective individual self and identity transcends to a higher level of equilibrium or higher level of harmony, and it enlarges itself and merges itself into a higher self. That is why impersonalization or depersonalization is the first primary feature or characteristic for the creator or for the writer. Now, we have the question of what and why. In the Indian context, the investigation of what and why is always more important than the investigation where and when. Where was it composed? When was it composed? Does it stand any significance? What was the primary objective of the text and why was it composed? So, this is where we say that a lot of time and effort is wasted on establishing chronologies or suggesting dates and bringing some evidences of putting the text into a certain canon or putting it under an umbrella of a particular date and period. But in India, we have always believed in a pan India phenomena. Now, this pan India phenomena is an indicator of a larger worldview. And we say that because we know that Kapila Vachan also says that we have a method of distinguishing between history, because Puran and Itihas. Puran is something which is older, and Itihas is how it happens. So we have never focused on Itihas. We have more into the tradition of Purans. And therefore, she says that when the author liberates the text from the boundaries of time and space, and when it becomes near to impossible to answer certain questions, that what particular spot in the Ganga the creation takes place, the human instrumentality, she says, then becomes an integral part of the dynamics of nature, a larger worldview, and flow and the course of the river. So we don't actually know how what was the particular spot where Ganga was created, but it becomes a flow in the time period. Another point is that the history of all verbal texts, that is, the text when they were transferred or put into establishing chronologies, it's not necessary to decipher or decode the contemporariness of the manuscripts. And this Vedic texts are the best examples to understand that we have never believed in such prescriptions. And we know that orality has always been an important aspect in all the verbal texts. And that is why a text is not contemporaneous with the written manuscript. And therefore, it is important and necessary that we see that the literary, the visual, or all the performative arts, they carry a tradition of their own.